In the harsh expanse of 1890s Texas, where the land is as unforgiving as the men who claim it, a story of unexpected redemption unfolds. Mira, a woman valued less than cattle by her gambling husband, finds herself sold to settle a debt. Her buyer is Western Heart, a wealthy rancher haunted by ghosts of his own past. He offers what he thinks is temporary sanctuary, unaware that this broken yet resilient woman will transform his desolate world. Through her quiet strength, his dying orchard begins to bloom. His lonely niece finds joy in letters and books, and the hollow spaces in his heart start to heal. But when shadows from Mira's past threaten to shatter their fragile peace, one question remains. Can a love born from such bitter beginnings survive the storms ahead? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gold band slipped from Mira's finger with surprising ease, as if even this small circle of metal knew it no longer belonged there. Frank had demanded it just moments before, his words slurring together in that familiar way that meant the gambling debt was worse than usual. She watched him stumble out the door of their small house on the edge of Silver Creek, heading toward the saloon where he'd already lost more than they had. Mira's hands shook as she continued kneading the bread, dough working it harder than necessary. The kitchen window framed the dusty Texas street outside, where late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of amber and regret. 10 years of marriage had taught her that Frank would return either flush with temporary victory or, more likely, with that dangerous gleam in his eye that meant trouble. The sound of horse hooves made her pause, knuckles white in the dough. But it wasn't Frank, just Mrs. Peterson from the general store, her wagon loaded with supplies. The older woman caught Mira's eye and offered a tight smile tinged with pity. News traveled fast in Silver Creek, and everyone knew about Frank's latest losing streak. Inside the house, evidence of their declining fortunes was everywhere. The fine china from her mother gathered dust behind cabinet doors that wouldn't quite close. Patches dotted the curtains she'd sewn herself, and the floor had developed a permanent stain where the roof leaked during last spring's rains. Frank had promised to fix it, just as he'd promised to quit gambling, to start fresh, to be the man she'd thought she'd married a decade ago. A floorboard creaked beneath her feet as she moved to check the bread rising near the stove. The sound reminded her of that first night in this house, when Frank had carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing. She'd been 18, full of dreams about the life they'd build together. Now, at 28, those dreams had crumbled like the walls of the house Frank had never quite finished painting. The sun was setting when she heard the heavy footsteps on the porch. Different from Frank's usual stumbling return, these were steady, purposeful. The door swung open, and there stood her husband. But he wasn't alone. Behind him loomed a shadow that would change everything. "Pack your things," Frank announced, his voice eerily clear. "You're leaving with Mr. Hart here, tonight." Mira's hands stilled on the dough. She looked past Frank to the tall figure in the doorway, his face hidden by the brim of a black hat. The stranger's silence filled the room like smoke, choking what remained of her world. "Frank," she whispered, "what have you done?" Her husband wouldn't meet her eyes. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, her wedding ring, glinting dully in the fading light. "Got a fair price for it," he muttered. "But not enough. Not nearly enough." His laugh was hollow, desperate. "But you, Mira, you were worth a lot more at the poker table." Earlier that day, Western Heart had been studying the land deed in his saddlebag when he first heard the name Mira Blackwood. The yellow document, bearing the sprawling acreage measurements of the Hart Ranch, had become a habit to carry, a reminder of what he'd built and what he'd lost. The Silver Creek Saloon wasn't his usual haunt, but water rights negotiations had brought him into town, and thirst had done the rest. He'd noticed Frank Blackwood immediately. Most men did. The type who wore desperation like cheap cologne. Broadcasting tells that any half-decent poker player could read. but it was the way Frank spoke about his wife that made Weston's hand tighten around his whiskey glass. "Pretty as a spring morning, my Mira," Frank had slurred, dealing another hand. "Good with numbers, too. Keeps the house running smooth as silk even when times are lean." His eyes had darted around the table, calculating. "Shame about the children, though. Never could give me any." The other players shifted uncomfortably, but Frank was too far gone to notice. He'd lost steadily through the afternoon, and now evening shadows stretched across the saloon floor. Weston had won most of those hands, though he'd tried to lose. A few. Something about Frank's desperate eyes made victory taste bitter. "One more hand," Frank announced, pulling something from his pocket. A woman's wedding ring caught the lamplight. "This here's worth $50 if it's worth a penny." Weston stood, gathering his winnings. "I'm done for the day." But Frank grabbed his arm, strength born of desperation. "Wait. One more bet. Real one this time." His voice dropped low. "My wife, one hand, winner takes all. You've won most of my money anyway. Might as well take the rest of my troubles too." The saloon went quiet. Even the piano player stopped, the last note hanging in the air like a held breath. Weston studied the man before him, seeing past the alcohol to something darker, something that had probably been there all along. "Your wife isn't property to be wagered," Weston said, his voice carrying the weight of years spent making hard decisions. Frank laughed, an ugly sound. "Shows what you know about marriage, Mr. Hart. Way I see it, she's my responsibility, and I'm offering to sell that responsibility to a man who can better afford it." He leaned closer, whiskey-soured breath filling the space between them. "Unless you'd rather I settle my debts with Les Jenkins over there. He's been eyeing her for years." Weston's gaze shifted to the man Frank indicated, a local rancher known for his mean streak and missing ranch hands. The deed in his saddlebag seemed to grow heavier, reminding him of promises made to his sister before she died. Promises about protecting those who needed it. "No poker," Weston said finally, "but I'll buy out your debts, all of them. In exchange, your wife gets her freedom and a safe place to stay until she decides what she wants." Frank's eyes narrowed. "And where might that safe place be? I've got a ranch house with empty rooms and a niece who could use some company. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." "Business arrangement," Frank repeated, rolling the words around like marbles. Then he smiled, showing too many teeth. "Well then, Mr. Hart, looks like we've got ourselves a deal. Shall we go inform the lady of her change in circumstances?" The deed felt like it was burning through the leather of Weston's saddlebag as they walked through the dusty streets. He'd built the Hart Ranch from nothing, turned it into something his sister had been proud of before consumption took her. Now its vast emptiness would finally serve a purpose, offering sanctuary to a woman who deserved better than being sold like cattle. But as they approached the small house at the edge of town, Weston couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far more complicated than a simple business arrangement. The sound of their boots on the porch boards seemed to echo with finality, and as Frank reached for the door, Weston caught a glimpse of movement through the window, a woman's silhouette, straight-backed and still, like a deer sensing danger. Mira's fingers found the torn Bible page in her apron pocket, touching the worn edges that had been smoothed by years of similar gestures. Her mother's favorite verse was barely legible now. The words about faith and strength faded like watercolors left in the sun. But she didn't need to read it. The words lived in her heart, even if their promise felt hollow in this moment. "You can't mean this, Frank." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as if someone else was speaking. The stranger, Mr. Hart, still hadn't moved from the doorway, his shadow stretching across her clean-swept floor like spilled ink. Frank was already pulling her carpetbag from the closet, stuffing it with whatever came to hand. "It's done, Mira. Mr. Hart here has agreed to take on my debts, and you're part of the arrangement." He paused, holding one of her cotton dresses. "Best take the blue one. Brings out your eyes." The casual cruelty of that comment broke something loose inside her. "And what of our vows? What of the promises we made before God and witnesses?" Finally, the stranger spoke. "Ma'am, If I may. His voice was deep, measured, like distant thunder on a clear day. He removed his hat, revealing features that spoke more of solitude than society. This isn't what your husband implied. You'll have a safe place to stay, your own room, complete freedom to— Freedom! The laugh that escaped her didn't sound like her own. Purchased freedom is just another kind of cage, Mr. Hart. Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or recognition. He took a step forward, then seemed to think better of it. I have a ranch outside of town. My niece Sarah lives there with me, but since my sister passed, she's been isolated. The arrangement would be temporary until you decide your own path. Mira's hand pressed against the Bible page, feeling the words through the fabric. Her mother had always said God worked in mysterious ways, but this seemed more like the devil's work. Yet there was something in Mr. Hart's eyes, not pity, which she couldn't have borne, but a kind of wounded understanding. Frank crashed around the small house, gathering her belongings with careless hands. When he reached for her mother's porcelain figurine, Mira moved quickly to intercept it. "I'll pack my own things." The next few minutes passed in a blur of folded cloth and wrapped treasures. The torn Bible page went in first, then the figurine, some clothes, her mother's recipe book. All the while, she felt Mr. Hart's presence by the door, solid and unchanging as a mountain. "The ranch has an orchard," he said suddenly, as if the words surprised even him. "It's fallen into disrepair since my sister, but the trees are still there, and a piano in the parlor, though it hasn't been played in years." Mira paused in her packing, a half-folded shawl in her hands. She couldn't remember the last time she'd played music. Frank had sold their piano 2 winters ago. The thought of keys under her fingers again made her throat tight. "Time to go," Frank announced, already heading for the door. He didn't look. Back didn't offer a goodbye. 10 years of marriage, ending with less ceremony than a cattle sale. Mr. Hart cleared his throat. "My horse is outside and the wagon for your things. Unless, would you prefer to wait until morning?" The kindness in the question nearly undid her. "No," she said firmly, closing the carpetbag. "There's nothing here for me now." He nodded, understanding what she didn't say. As they stepped onto the porch, the evening air carried the scent of approaching rain. Frank was already halfway to the saloon, his figure growing smaller with each step. "I don't know what to call you," Mira said quietly, watching her husband disappear into the gathering dark. "Western. Just Western will do." He helped her into the wagon with careful hands, then reached for the reins. "And I don't expect you to— Call me anything at all if that's your choice. Your life is your own, Mrs. Blackwood." "Mira," she corrected, tasting the freedom of speaking her given name. "If we're to be whatever this is, I'd prefer Mira." The wagon began to move, and she didn't look back at the house that had been her cage for 10 years. Instead, she touched the Bible page through her pocket once more and watched the road ahead, where storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Dawn was breaking when the wagon crested the final hill, revealing Hart Ranch in the pearl-grey light. Mira sat straighter, taking in the sprawling property. The main house rose from the landscape like a ship at anchor, proud but weathered. Its white paint faded to the color of old bones. Behind it, rows of twisted trees stretched toward the horizon, their bare branches reaching for the sky like supplicants. "The orchard," Weston said, following her gaze. Something in his voice made her turn. He was looking at the trees with an expression she recognized, the same way Frank used to look at their marriage bed after another empty month had passed. "My sister Catherine kept ledgers for every tree, every harvest. Haven't opened them since she passed." Before Mira could respond, movement caught her eye. A small figure darted between the porch columns, then disappeared inside the house. The door slammed with the distinctive force of youth trying to appear invisible. "Sarah," Weston explained, helping Mira down from the wagon. "She's not used to visitors." The house's interior spoke of male solitude, good furniture gone dusty, curtains hanging slightly askew. But beneath the neglect lay bones of grace. High ceilings, wide windows, rooms designed for a family's laughter. Mira's fingers itched to set things right, though she quickly stilled them. This wasn't her home to fix. Your room is upstairs, first. A door on the right. Sarah's is at the end of the hall. Mine's downstairs. Weston cleared his throat. The kitchen's through there. Help yourself to anything. I need to see to the horses. He was gone before she could respond, boots echoing on the porch boards. Mira stood in the front hall, her carpet bag heavy in her hands, feeling like a painting hung in the wrong house. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Deliberate, she thought, a warning sound. Looking up, she caught a glimpse of dark braids and a wary eye peering through the railings. "You must be Sarah," Mira said softly. "I'm Mira." The eye disappeared, but the voice that came back was clear, if cautious. "Why are you here?" Before Mira could fashion a suitable answer, her gaze fell on a leather-bound book on a nearby desk. The spine read, Heart Orchard Ledger, 1885-1890. Her hands moved of their own accord, opening to a random page. Catherine's handwriting flowed across the yellowed paper. April 15th, 1889. Peach trees in South Row showing first blossoms. Sarah helped count them today. 247 on the oldest tree. She's taking to numbers like a duck to water. That's Aunt Catherine's book. Sarah had descended halfway down the stairs, drawn by Mira's interest. Uncle Weston doesn't like people touching it. Mira closed the ledger gently. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have pried. She used to let me help her count things." Sarah's voice went soft around the edges. "Blossoms, fruit, even the bees sometimes. She said numbers tell stories if you know how to listen." "Did she teach you to read the stories?" Sarah's face clouded. "She was going to, but then she got sick and—" The girl straightened, armor sliding back into place. "Uncle Weston says, you're staying in the blue room, if that's all right with you. It's not my house." But Sarah lingered on the stairs, studying Mira with eyes too old for her face. "Are you going to try to be my new aunt?" "No," Mira said firmly. "I'm just someone who needed a place to stay for a while. Nothing more." "Good." Sarah stood. "Because Aunt Catherine used to say you can't replace people. You can only make room for new ones." She turned to go, then paused. "The blue room gets morning sun. Aunt Catherine used to say it was like sleeping inside a robin's egg." Mira watched the girl disappear down the hall, her footsteps fading into the quiet house. Through the window, she could see Weston in the stable yard, his movements sure and steady as he cared for the horses. Beyond him, the orchard stretched away like a forest of memories, waiting to share its stories with anyone who knew how to listen. She picked up her bag and headed for the stairs, the ledger's glimpse of past happiness echoing in her mind. Catherine's voice seemed to whisper from its pages, of hope, of growth, of patience, of how some things had to die before new life could take root. Mira found the primer 3 days after her arrival, tucked behind a row of leather-bound books in Catherine's old sitting room. Its blue cloth cover was faded, the gold lettering worn to shadows. McGuffey's First Reader. Inside, a childish hand had practiced letters in the margins. Catherine's name, written over and over, each attempt more confident than the last. The discovery came after she'd noticed Sarah's habits, how the girl would run her fingers along book spines without pulling them out, how she'd stare at newspaper headlines with fierce concentration, how she'd fold letters from town into her pocket unopened. Little tells that painted a picture Mira recognized from her teaching days before marriage had closed that chapter of her life. That afternoon, she found Sarah in her usual spot on the back porch, watching Weston work with a young colt in the distant paddock. The girl's dark braids were coming loose, wisping around her face like ink in water. "Would you help me with something?" Mira kept her voice casual, the primer hidden in the folds of her skirt. "I found some of your aunt's old books, but the dust is making it hard to read them clearly. Would you read a passage to me?" Sarah went still, like a rabbit sensing a hawk's shadow. "I'm busy. It won't take long. Just this one page." Mira opened the primer to a simple story about a cat and a ball of yarn. The words were basic, the kind any child of 12 should manage easily. "I said I'm busy." Sarah's hands gripped the porch railing, knuckles white. "Why don't you ask Uncle Weston?" "He likes books." Mira sat down beside her, letting the primer rest between them. "Your aunt started teaching you, didn't she, before she got sick?" The silence stretched like taffy, thick and heavy. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely a whisper. She said letters were like music notes. They make something beautiful when you put them together right. But after Uncle Weston tried, he did, but he's got the ranch and the horses and... She swallowed hard. "Besides, girls don't need reading to work a ranch." "Who told you that?" "Mrs. Peterson in town. She said I should focus on practical things like cooking and sewing." Sarah's chin lifted. "I can already do sums in my head faster than her son." "Catherine taught you numbers?" "And stars. She said a woman should always be able to find her way home." Sarah's finger traced the primer's embossed cover. "Sometimes I pretend I can read the books in the library. I make up stories about the pictures. Uncle Weston knows I'm pretending, but he never says anything." Mira thought of Weston out there with the colt, how patiently he worked to earn its trust. "Would you like to learn? Really learn, I mean. We could start with your aunt's primer. You know how to teach?" There was hunger in Sarah's voice now, carefully contained but unmistakable. "I taught at a school in Austin before I married. Every child learns differently, but they all can learn." Sarah picked up the primer, handling it like it might crumble to dust. Aunt Catherine used to say that too. She opened it to the first page, where the alphabet marched in neat rows. "Will it be hard? Parts of it will be. But so is breaking. Colts, and I've seen how you watch that." Mira smiled. "We'll start slow just like your uncle does with the young horses. First we make friends with the letters. Uncle Weston won't mind? Why don't we ask him?" Mira nodded toward the paddock where Weston was approaching, leading the colt. He'd been watching them, she realized. Not obviously, but with the same careful attention he gave to everything that mattered. "Ask me what?" He reached the porch, hat tipped back, sweat marking his shirt. Sarah clutched the primer to her chest. "Mira says she can teach me, like Aunt Catherine was going to." Something flickered in Weston's eyes. Pain, hope, gratitude, all tangled together. He looked at Mira for a long moment, then back at his niece. "Your aunt would like that, I think." His voice was rough. "We can clear out her old schoolroom if you'd like. Everything's still there, just as she left it. Can we start today?" Sarah was already standing, earlier wariness forgotten in the face of possibility. "We can start right now." Mira rose too, catching Weston's eye. The thanks in his gaze made her throat tight. After all, there's no time like the present to begin a new story. The broken irrigation pump lay in pieces on the workbench, its rusted innards spread out like a mechanical autopsy. Mira studied the components, remembering how her father used to let her help repair similar equipment on their small farm. Before the fever took him, before Mother's desperate remarriage to Frank, before everything changed. "It's not beyond saving," she said mostly to herself, but Weston's head snapped up from where he was mending tack across the barn. "The pump?" He set aside the leather bridle. "Been meaning to look at it, but there's always something more pressing." Mira picked up a corroded valve. "Like that fence in the north pasture, or the new colts training, or the 100 other things a ranch this size demands." Their eyes met across the shadowed space, and something shifted in the air between them. A month had passed since her arrival, and they'd developed a careful dance of courtesy and distance. But here, surrounded by broken things that could be fixed, Mira felt bold enough to speak plainly. "The orchard's dying," she said. "Not dead, not yet, but it needs water. Real irrigation, not just prayer and morning dew." Weston moved closer, studying the disassembled pump. His sleeve brushed her arm as he reached for a gear, and she caught the scent of leather and sage. Catherine used to say the same thing. She had plans drawn up for a new irrigation system, but then, "Show me." He hesitated only a moment before pulling a rolled paper from a shelf. The blueprints were Catherine's work, detailed and precise, showing how water could be channeled from the creek through a series of pumps and pipes to reach every tree. "Smart woman, your sister." Mira traced the neat lines. She understood that. Even old things can be made new again with the right care. Is that what you believe? His voice was quiet, but something in it made her look up. He was watching her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but didn't. I believe, she said carefully, that anything worth saving is worth the work it takes to save it. Her hands moved over the pump parts, organizing them. My father taught me about machines like this. It's not so different from the one we used on our farm. You never mentioned your father before. He died when I was 15. Fever took him. In 3 days. The metal was cool under her fingers. He used to say, every piece of equipment tells you what's wrong, if you listen carefully enough. Weston picked up a wrench, turning it over in his calloused hands. And what's this one telling you? That it needs cleaning, new seals, and someone to believe in it again. She met his eyes. I can fix it, Mr. Hart. And once it's working, I can help with the orchard, too. I've been studying Catherine's ledgers. Weston, he interrupted, please. After a month of shared meals and morning greetings, I think we can manage first names. A smile tugged at her lips. Weston, then. The trees aren't dead, just sleeping. With water and care, they could bloom again. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the pump parts, the blueprints, her hands still moving surely among the pieces. Finally he said, Catherine would have liked you. She never could abide letting things go to waste. Not machines, not land, not people. Wise woman. Too wise sometimes. He picked up a rag, began cleaning a gear. The pump is yours to fix if you want it. And the orchard, too. I can't promise help. The ranch keeps me busy, but I won't stand in your way. Mira felt something. Bloom in her chest, warm and unexpected as spring flowers. I don't need help, just permission and perhaps... She gestured at the tools scattered around them. Access to the workshop now and then. The workshop, the tools, whatever you need. He handed her the cleaned gear. It's good to hear someone talk about the orchard with hope again. They worked. In comfortable silence after that, cleaning parts and laying them out in proper order. Through the barn door, Mira could see Sarah on the porch, practicing her letters. The girl had taken to reading like a duck to water, just as Catherine had once written about numbers. The future stretched out before them like Catherine's blueprints, clear lines waiting to be followed, old dreams waiting to be rebuilt. As she worked, Mira found herself humming her father's favorite hymn, and after a while she noticed Weston's hands moving in time with the melody. The sheet that covered the piano in the parlor had gathered enough dust to tell its own story of abandonment. Mira stood before it one evening, her hands hesitating at the edges of the fabric. She'd noticed the instrument's shape her first week. Here, but had respected its shrouded silence, understanding how grief turns familiar objects into monuments. But today had been different. She'd caught Sarah humming while working on her letters, a snippet of something that might have been a hymn or a lullaby. The girl had stopped the moment she realized what she was doing, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Aunt Catherine used. To sing all the time, Sarah had whispered, as if confessing a secret. Uncle Weston doesn't like music anymore. Now, as sunset painted the parlor walls in amber light, Mira made her decision. The sheet came away with a soft whisper, revealing a Steinway that must have been the pride of the house once. Its mahogany. Surface was dulled but unwarped. Catherine had chosen its location well, away from direct sunlight and drafts. Mira's fingers traced the fallboard, remembering her mother's voice. Music isn't just in the playing, dear heart. It's in the caring. Too. She taught Mira to clean and maintain their own modest upright before ever teaching her to play. The key cover lifted smoothly, suggesting that whatever neglect the piano had suffered was mostly superficial. The ivory keys were yellowed but intact, waiting like old friends. Mira pressed middle C gently, wincing at the expected discord, but the note that emerged was surprisingly clear, if flat. Not ruined then, just lonely. She didn't hear Weston enter, but suddenly he was there, filling the doorway with his presence. Catherine had it tuned every spring, he said, his voice rough. Said a piano was like a living thing. Needs regular care and conversation. Mira's hands stilled on the keys. "I can cover it again." "No." The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. He moved into the room, boots silent on the rug. "It's been too quiet here." She watched him approach the piano, noting how he touched its surface, the way he touched nervous horses, with respect for old wounds. "Would it be all right if I played something, just to see what it needs?" He nodded, throat working. Mira turned back to the keys, considering. Not a hymn. Too heavy with meaning. Not a popular song. Too light for this moment. Her fingers found the opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, slow and careful. The piano's voice was hesitant at first, like someone waking from a long sleep. But as she continued, it seemed to remember itself. The melody filled the parlor, spilling out into the hall where Sarah had appeared, wide-eyed and silent. Mira played the first movement through, letting the familiar notes wash over them all. When the final chord faded, the silence that followed felt different, expectant rather than empty. "That was Aunt Catherine's favorite," Sarah said, moving into the room. "She tried to teach me, but my hands were too small." "They're not too small now," Mira observed, patting the bench beside her. Sarah came slowly, as if drawn by an invisible thread, and sat. Mira showed her how to place her fingers for a simple C major scale. "I remember this part," Sarah whispered, pressing the keys carefully. The notes weren't quite even, but they were. Honest. She looked up at her uncle, anxiety and hope warring in her expression. Weston had moved to the window, his back to them, but his shoulders had lost their usual rigid set. "Your aunt," he said finally, "used to play every evening after dinner. Said music helped the day settle properly, like sugar helping jam set." Mira caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window, 3 figures connected by the pianos. Presence, like a photograph waiting to be taken. She began to play again, something simpler this time, a folk tune her mother had taught her. After a moment, Sarah's clear voice rose tentatively with the melody. "I remember this one," the girl said between verses. "Aunt Catherine used to sing it while she worked in the orchard." The setting suns stretched their shadows long across the floor, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour, but no one moved. Mira continued playing, one song flowing into another, while Sarah's voice grew more confident, and Weston remained. By the window, his silhouette softening as darkness gathered, as if the music was slowly washing away layers of grief neither he nor Sarah had known how to shed. The recipe book's spine crackled as Mira opened it, releasing the scent of vanilla and memory. Her mother's handwriting filled the margins of every page, not just ingredients and methods, but little notes that told the story of their family. Papa's favorite, beside the peach cobbler recipe, for celebrations, next to the buttermilk biscuits. When comfort is needed, accompanying the chicken and dumplings. It had been 2 months since she'd arrived at Hart Ranch, and something had shifted after that evening at the piano. The house felt less like a museum of grief and more like a place where life might bloom again. Today, she'd found the courage to unpack this last piece of her past. "What's that smell?" Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the aroma of baking bread. The girl's reading primer was tucked under her arm. She carried it everywhere now, like a talisman. "My mother's honey wheat bread." Mira gestured to the recipe book. "Would you like to see?" Sarah approached the counter carefully, as if the book might spook like one of her uncle's young horses. "These notes, they're all from your mama, everyone." She said recipes were really just love letters to the future. Mira traced her mother's familiar loops and swirls. "See here? She's written, 'Remember to sing while kneading, the bread knows the difference.'" A smile tugged at Sarah's mouth. "Aunt Catherine used to say something like that about the orchard, that happy trees bear sweeter fruit." She leaned closer, studying the pages. "Your mama's writing looks like music. She was a music teacher before she married my father." Mira hadn't spoken of her mother in years. Frank had never wanted to hear about her family. "She taught me piano and cooking at the same time. Said they both required the same kind of attention. Is that why you play so well?" Sarah's finger hovered over a recipe for spice cake. Could we make this sometime? We could make It today, if you like, for after dinner. Mira pulled out a mixing bowl. Your uncle's been working hard on that new fence. Might be nice to surprise him. They worked together through the afternoon, the kitchen filling with warmth and purpose. Sarah proved to have a natural feel for baking, measuring ingredients with the same precision she now brought to her letters. As they worked, stories emerged. Sarah sharing memories of cooking with Catherine, Mira offering tales of her own childhood kitchen. When Weston came in from the fields, the sun setting behind him, he stopped short in the doorway. The table was set for three, steam rising from bowls of beef stew, the fresh bread golden and waiting. The spice cake cooled on the windowsill, its aroma mingling with the evening air. Sarah helped with everything, Mira said, suddenly uncertain. They usually ate separately, crossing paths in the kitchen like polite strangers. I hope you don't mind. Mind? His voice was rough. It's been a long time since. He cleared his throat. It smells like home used to. They sat together, passing bread and stew, the recipe book open on the sideboard like a fourth presence at the table. Sarah proudly explained her role in the meal's creation, her words tumbling out with unusual animation. Weston listened intently, something soft in his eyes that made Mira's heart twist. Aunt Catherine had a book like that, he said later as Sarah cut the cake. Full of notes about everything, recipes, remedies, bits of wisdom. She used to say a family's story is written in what they feed each other. Your sister was a wise woman. Mira watched Sarah carefully divide the cake into perfect thirds. My mother would have liked her, I think. Would have liked you too, Aunt Catherine would, Sarah said absently, then froze, fork halfway to her plate. I'm sorry. I didn't. It's all right, Mira said softly, meeting Weston's gaze across the table. Something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of how their careful boundaries were slowly blurring, like butter melting into warm bread. Later, after Sarah had gone up to bed with her primer, Mira found Weston studying the recipe book. His finger traced her mother's note about singing to the bread, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, he said simply, for bringing this back to us. They both knew he wasn't just talking about the meal. In the quiet kitchen, with the dishes done and the recipe book open between them, Mira felt something settle into place, like the last ingredient in a well-loved recipe, making everything complete. Dawn painted the orchard in watercolor shades of pink and gold when Mira first saw it. A single branch heavy with blossoms, white petals unfurled against the spring sky. She stood motionless, hardly daring to breathe, as if the slightest movement might scatter this miracle like dandelion seeds in the wind. 3 months of work had led to this moment. 3 months of repaired pumps, cleared irrigation channels, and careful pruning. 3 months of studying Catherine's ledgers, of falling asleep with dirt under her fingernails and hope in her heart. Uncle Weston, Sarah's voice, shattered the morning quiet. She'd taken to joining Mira on her early orchard inspections, calling it their tree patrol. Now the girl ran toward the house, braids flying. Uncle Weston, come quick! He emerged from the barn, still buckling his gun belt, a rancher's habit, even this early. Seeing Mira standing transfixed in the orchard, he crossed the yard with long strides, Sarah dancing around him like an excited pup. Here, Mira said softly when he reached her. Look, the branch hung at eye level, perfect for inspection. Weston stepped closer, his sleeve brushing her shoulder. The morning air carried the scent of leather and coffee from the house, mingling with the sweet perfume of the blossoms. Catherine always said the Duchess apple was the most stubborn tree in the orchard. His voice was rough with memory. Said it would only bloom when it felt truly at home. The roots were sound, Mira replied, professional pride warring with deeper emotion. It just needed someone to believe in it again. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the space between them, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Sarah reached up to touch a blossom with gentle fingers. Can we tell people? She asked. Mrs. Peterson said nothing would ever grow here again, but she was wrong. Can we show everyone she was wrong? Weston's hand found his niece's shoulder. Maybe we should. Been too long since this place saw a proper celebration. The word spread through the community like wind through wheat. By Sunday afternoon, wagons and riders filled the ranch yard. Families brought dishes to share, children darted between the trees, and old-timers who remembered the orchard in its glory days stood beneath the blooming branch, nodding in approval. "Just like old times," Mrs. Martinez said, her weathered face creased with smile lines. "Catherine used to throw the best harvest parties. Remember Weston? Every fall, music and dancing until midnight." Weston, who had been watching Mira's show, a group of children how to check for new growth, turned at the sound of his name. "I remember. Good to see life returning." Mrs. Martinez patted his arm, both to the trees and the house. More neighbors arrived as the afternoon mellowed toward evening. Someone brought a fiddle, another a guitar. Tables appeared laden with food, Mrs. Peterson's contribution notably absent, though no one mentioned it. Sarah proudly showed off, her improving reading skills to anyone who would listen, her earlier shyness forgotten in the excitement. "Your mama's spice cake is a hit," Weston said, finding Mira by the punch bowl. "Sarah's been bragging about helping make it. She has a gift for baking." Mira watched the girl demonstrate proper measuring technique to Mrs. Martinez's granddaughter, like she has for reading. She just needed the chance to try, like the orchard needed a chance. His voice was soft, meant only for her. "You've brought spring back to more than just the trees, Mira." Before she could respond, young Tommy Martinez called for a dance. The musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples began forming sets on the packed earth between the trees. Sarah appeared at Mira's elbow. "Aunt Catherine always danced at parties," she said meaningfully, looking between her uncle and Mira. "She said it was bad luck not to dance under blooming trees." Weston cleared his throat. "Would you, that is, might I have this dance, Miss Mira?" The formal address made her smile, remembering their careful early days. "You might indeed, Mr. Hart." His hand was warm and sure as it found her waist, and they moved together as if they'd done this 100 times before. Above them, the blooming branch swayed in the evening breeze, scattering petals like wedding rice. "I never thanked you properly," he said as they turned, "for seeing what could be instead of what was lost." "The orchard taught me that," Mira replied. "Sometimes what looks like an ending is just winter waiting for spring." They danced until the stars came out, while Sarah watched from beside the punch bowl, her face glowing with the satisfaction of a plan well executed. Le suggest. Apple's blossoms shone silver in the moonlight, promising more miracles to come. The letter sat on the schoolroom desk, written in Sarah's careful hand, each word a testament to months of patient learning. "Dear Mama," it began, the ink slightly smudged where tears had fallen. Mira stood in the doorway, not wanting to intrude on this private moment, but Sarah looked up and beckoned her in. "Would you," the girl's voice wavered, "would you check it for me? I want it to be perfect." Mira pulled a chair close, breathing in the familiar scent of ink and chalk dust. The schoolroom had become their sanctuary over the past 4 months, its walls now decorated with Sarah's practice sheets and carefully copied passages. But this was different. This was Sarah's heart on paper. "Dear Mama," Mira read aloud softly, feeling Sarah's tension beside her. "I hope you can read this wherever you are. Aunt Catherine always said letters carry love across any distance, so maybe they can reach heaven too." Sarah's fingers twisted in her skirt. "Is that silly?" "No, dear heart. It's beautiful." Mira continued reading. "I learned to read, finally. I wish you could see me. I can read all of Aunt Catherine's books now, and Mira says my penmanship is improving every day. She's patient, like you and Aunt Catherine were. She doesn't mind when I ask the same question twice. The orchard is blooming again. Uncle Weston smiles more now. Sometimes I hear him whistling in the barn, like he used to when you were alive. Mira fixed the irrigation pump and taught me about water pressure. She says understanding how things work helps us fix what's broken. I miss you every day, but it hurts less now." Mira says that's normal, that grief changes like seasons. She lost. Her mama too, so she understands. She doesn't try to replace you or Aunt Catherine. She just makes room in her heart for me, like you said good people do. Mira's voice caught on the last lines. Sarah leaned against her shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over their months together. "There's more," the girl whispered, "but it's harder to read." Mira continued, her voice gentle. "Sometimes I dream you and Aunt Catherine are sitting in the orchard, having tea like you used to. In my dream, you're both smiling because the trees are blooming and music is playing. From the house again, Uncle Weston is there too, looking young like in the photographs. And Mira fits in the picture like she was always meant to be there. Is it wrong to be happy when you're gone? To love someone new? Aunt Catherine said love multiplies, it doesn't divide. But I worry sometimes that being happy means I'm forgetting. Your loving daughter, Sarah." Silence filled the schoolroom, broken only by the distant sound of Weston working in the yard. Finally, Mira spoke, choosing her words carefully. "Your mother would be so proud of this letter, Sarah. Not just the writing, which is beautiful, but the heart behind it." "Really?" Sarah's voice was small. "The words aren't too simple. The simplest words often carry the deepest truth." Mira touched the paper gently. "And your truth here is powerful. You've written about love and loss and healing in a way many grown folks never manage." Sarah straightened, pride warring with vulnerability. "Uncle Weston kept all of Aunt Catherine's letters. He has a box of them in his study. Do you think, would it be all right if I asked him to keep this one too?" "I think he would be honored." Mira helped Sarah fold the letter carefully. "Would you like me to go with you when you show him?" "No." Sarah stood, clutching the letter. "This is something I need to do myself." "But," she turned at the door, "thank you, Mira. Not just for teaching me to write, but for making it safe to remember, and to forget sometimes too." Mira watched her go, back straight, letter held like a precious thing. Through the window, she could see Weston by the barn, pausing in his work to watch his niece approach. Sarah held out the letter, saying something Mira couldn't hear. But she saw Weston kneel down, saw him take the paper with reverent hands, saw him gather Sarah close as he read. Later, Mira found a note on her desk in the schoolroom, written in Sarah's improving hand. "Mama would have loved you too." The words blurred as she read them, and she thought about love, how it could bloom again and again, like apple blossoms after winter, each flowering as true as the last. The newspaper lay on Weston's desk, like a snake in the garden, its headline stark against the morning light. "Local man's gambling scheme leaves trail of debt and violence." Mira's hands trembled as she read the words she'd been dreading for 5 months. Frank Blackwood, formerly of Silver Creek, faces allegations of fraud and assault following a series of high-stakes poker games across 3 counties. Witnesses report Blackwood has been moving west, leaving a wake of unpaid debts and broken promises. His most recent appearance in Preston's Ford ended in violence when he claimed his wife's property rights as collateral, a wife reportedly sold to settle previous gambling debts. The paper crackled in her grip. Through the study window, she could see Sarah in the orchard, practicing her reading under the blooming Duchess apple. The girl had no idea how quickly peace could shatter, how suddenly the world could shift beneath one's feet. "I should have shown you sooner." Weston's voice made her start. He stood in the doorway, his face grave. "The paper came yesterday, but you wanted to protect me." Mira set the newspaper down. "Like you've been protecting me all these months." He moved into the room, boots silent on the rug. "Not protecting, offering sanctuary. There's a difference." "Is there?" She turned to face him fully. "When I came here, you said it was a business arrangement, temporary. But we both know it's become something else, haven't we?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken things. Through the open window came the sound of Sarah sounding out words, her voice carrying clearly. "And the prince said to Cinderella, 'You are not bound by who you were, but who you choose to be.'" Weston's laugh was soft without humor. Even fairy tales know the truth of it. He picked up the paper, studied Frank's name as if it might reveal secrets. He has no legal claim on you. The divorce papers were filed months ago. Laws don't mean much to men like Frank. Mira's voice was steady, though fear coiled in her stomach. He won't come for me because he wants me. He'll come because his pride can't bear that I might be happy without him. Then he'll find more than he bargained for. Weston's tone made her look up sharply. The tenderness she'd grown used to seeing in his eyes was still there, but beneath it was something harder, the steel that had helped him build this ranch from nothing. I won't let him destroy this. The words surprised her with their fierceness. Not the orchard, not Sarah's progress, not— She gestured helplessly at the space between them. This thing they'd never quite named. No, he said softly, we won't. The sound of hoofbeats made them both tense, but it was only Mr. Martinez riding up, probably to discuss the shared water rights they'd been negotiating. Still, the moment of fear was telling. We should tell Sarah, Mira said. She's old enough to understand, and she deserves to know what might be coming. Weston nodded slowly. She's stronger than I sometimes remember. Catherine always said we shouldn't protect children from truth, only prepare them for it. Your sister was wise. Mira touched the newspaper one last time, then deliberately turned away from it. I'll speak with Sarah, but first, there's something you should know. She told him then about her last day with Frank, details she'd kept close all these months. About the other women he'd hurt, the pattern of charm and destruction she'd witnessed, about why she'd stayed so long, trying to save a man who didn't want saving. Weston listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he did something he'd never done before. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. Thank you, he said simply, for trusting me with this. Outside, Sarah had finished her reading. They could hear her talking to the trees, a habit she'd picked up from Catherine's notes about how plants grew better with conversation. The girl's voice was bright with hope and future, everything Mira had thought lost forever in those dark days with Frank. I won't run, she said firmly, looking down at their joined hands. Whatever comes, this is my home now. These are my trees, my people, She met Weston's eyes. My family, if you'll have me. His fingers tightened on hers. We've been your family since you fixed that pump and brought music back to this house. Everything else is just paper and words, but they both knew that paper and words could cut as surely as any knife. As if to emphasize the point, a gust of wind through the window scattered the newspaper's pages across the floor, Frank's name repeating like a warning. The storm rolled in like Judgment Day, turning afternoon to twilight in the space of a breath. Mira found the pocket watch while helping Sarah move Weston's desk away from a leaking window in his study. It tumbled from a drawer, its silver case tarnished but intact. That was grandfather's, Sarah said, rescuing it from a puddle of rainwater. Uncle Weston carried it every day until Aunt Catherine died. Then it stopped working, and he said maybe it was time to let some things stay broken. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that rattled the windows. Sarah pressed closer to Mira, who absently stroked the girl's hair. The watch felt heavy in her other hand, solid with history and meaning. Some things need to be broken before they can be fixed properly, Mira said, studying the mechanism through the crystal face. Like that irrigation pump, remember? We had to take it all apart before we could make it work again. Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. Could you fix this too, like you fixed the pump? Before Mira could answer, Weston's voice carried from the front porch. Storm's bearing down hard. Get everything battened down in the orchard? Yes, Mira called back. Sarah and I covered the new saplings this morning. She tucked the watch into her pocket, making a mental note to examine it later. The wind rose to a howl, and rain beat against the windows like thrown gravel. They worked together to move furniture away from the vulnerable spots, laying down towels to catch the worst leaks. Sarah organized their efforts with the same precision she now brought to her letters, directing them with the authority of a general. The orchard, Weston said suddenly, pausing in his work. The support stakes for the Duchess apple aren't set deep enough yet, Mira finished, already reaching for her shawl. I'll help you. Both of you stay here, Sarah ordered, sounding so much like Catherine that they both turned to stare. I'll watch for leaks and keep the fire going. The rain hit them like a waterfall as they ran toward the orchard. Mira's skirts were soaked in seconds, but she barely noticed. The Duchess apple's newly grafted branches needed their support stakes reinforced, or months of work could be lost in one violent storm. They worked quickly, wordlessly, understanding each other's movements as if they'd done this 1,000 times. When the last stake was secured, Mira straightened to find Weston watching her, rain running down his face like tears. "What?" she asked, suddenly conscious of how her wet hair must look, how her sodden dress clung to her arms. "You know what this tree means to Sarah?" "To me." His voice was barely audible above the storm. "Catherine grafted it the year our parents died. Said sometimes the strongest trees are the ones that carry two bloodlines." Mira's hand went to her pocket where the watch rested. "Like families?" "Like families." He stepped closer, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. "Mira, if Frank comes—" "When," she corrected softly. When he comes, I need you to know something." His hand came up to touch her cheek, gentle despite its workman's calluses. "This hasn't been a business arrangement for a long time." The pocket watch seemed to pulse against her leg, marking a moment she'd remember forever. "I know," she whispered. Lightning turned the world white. Thunder crashed overhead. And somehow they were kissing. His arms were around her waist, her hands in his hair, and the rain blessed them like holy water. The kiss tasted of storms and promises, and time finally moving forward again. When they broke apart, breathless, Mira pulled the watch from her pocket. "I think I can fix this," she said, "if you'll let me try." Weston looked at the watch, then at her, understanding all she wasn't saying. "It's been sleeping a long time." "Like the orchard," she said, "like my heart." She curled his fingers around the timepiece. "But some things wake up stronger for the rest." Another flash of lightning illuminated Sarah's face at the study window, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The girl pointed urgently at the sky, reminding them of the danger still raging. They ran back to the house hand in hand, no longer pretending they were anything but what they'd become to each other. Inside, Sarah had hot coffee waiting and a knowing look that made them both blush. Later that night, after the storm had passed and Sarah had gone to bed, Mira sat at the kitchen table with the disassembled watch. Its gears lay before her like the pieces of the life she was building, complicated, delicate, but ultimately fixable with patience and care. Weston found her there, brought by the soft sound of her tools on metal. Without a word, he pulled up a chair and watched her work, their shoulders touching, while outside the wet earth drank deep and the orchard's roots grew stronger for the storm. The marriage license lay on Judge Parker's desk like a yellowed accusation. Frank had produced it with the flourish of a card, sharp, revealing an ace, his smile sharp enough to cut. Mira stood between Weston and Sarah, feeling the girl's hand, tight in hers, while outside the judge's window, Silver Creek went about its business as if her world wasn't unraveling. "The law's clear on this," Frank said, his voice carrying the fake reasonableness she remembered so well. "A man can't buy another man's wife. That paper Mr. Hart signed? Worthless. This here's the only document that matters." 6 days had passed since Frank's return. 6 days of watching him work the town like a revival preacher, spinning tales of redemption and regret. He'd arrived clean-shaven and clear-eyed, speaking of changed ways and second chances. Some folks actually believed him. "The divorce petition was filed months ago," Weston said, his voice level despite the tension Mira could feel radiating from him. "And there are witnesses to..." "Witnesses to what?" Frank's laugh was casual, practiced. "To me settling a gambling debt with the only collateral I had? Seems to me that makes the whole situation worse, not better." Trafficking in human lives isn't looked on kindly in civilized society. Sarah's grip tightened. The girl had barely spoken since Frank's arrival, but her eyes followed him like she was tracking a rattlesnake. Now she straightened, chin lifting, in a way that reminded Mira of Catherine's portrait in the parlor. "Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said clearly, "told everyone you sold Mira like she was property. She said it was a scandal and a shame." Frank's smile flickered. Mrs. Peterson carried weight in Silver Creek, her words shaping public opinion like wind, shaped sand. "That old gossip's memory isn't what it used to be, but mine is." Sarah's voice gained strength. "And I can read now. I've read all of Aunt Catherine's letters about legal matters. She wrote that intention matters in contracts. What was your intention that night, Mr. Blackwood?" The question hung in the air like gun smoke. Judge Parker, who had been listening, silently leaned forward. "The girl raises a fair point. What exactly was your intention, Frank?" "To protect my wife from my own weaknesses." Frank touched the marriage license gently. "I thought Mr. Hart could give her a better life while I got myself straight. And I have. I'm a changed man." "That's not what you said." Mira spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "You said, and I quote, 'She's my responsibility, and I'm offering to sell that responsibility.' Those were your exact words." "People say all sorts of things when they're desperate." Frank spread his hands, appealing to the judge. "I'm not proud of that night, but I'm here now, ready to make amends, ready to take my wife home." "Home?" The word came out before Mira could stop it. "The orchard is my home. Sarah is my home. Weston—" She caught herself, but Frank's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he said softly, "so that's how it is. Tell me, Judge Parker, what's your opinion on adultery?" "That's enough." Weston's voice cracked like a whip. "You want to make this ugly, Frank? Let's talk about the men you cheated in Preston's Ford, or the assault charges in—" "Gentlemen," Judge Parker held up a hand. "This is a matter of law, not accusations. The marriage license is valid, but so is the divorce petition. The question is one of contracts and consent." He looked at Mira. "What do you want, Mrs. Blackwood?" The name felt wrong now, like a shoe that no longer fit. Mira touched the repaired pocket watch in her dress pocket, drawing strength from its steady tick. "I want to go home, to the ranch, to my orchard, to my family." "Your family?" Frank's voice dripped false concern. "We never had children, Mira. Remember how that ate at you? But I'm willing to forgive that. To start fresh, she means us." Sarah stepped forward. "We're her family. She taught me to read, to bake, to believe in myself. She fixed the irrigation pump and made the trees bloom again. She brought music back to our house." The girl turned to the judge. "Doesn't that matter more than an old piece of paper?" Judge Parker studied the marriage license thoughtfully. "The law recognizes blood and marriage as family, but it also recognizes that contracts made under duress are void." He looked at Frank. "And selling one's wife at a poker table seems the very definition of duress." "I have witnesses," Frank began, but the judge cut him off. "So do I. This whole town witnessed what kind of man you were, Frank, and what kind of woman Mira has proven to be." He reached for his gavel. "I'll need time to review the precedents, but until then, Mrs. Blackwood stays where she chooses. We'll reconvene in 3 days." Outside the judge's office, Frank caught Mira's arm. "This isn't over," he whispered, his mask of reformation cracking. "What's mine is mine." Weston stepped between them, his movement casual, but full of promise. "That's where you're wrong, Frank. Mira belongs to herself, always has. We just had the sense to see it." They walked home through town, Sarah between them, their shadows merging in the late afternoon light. But Mira could feel Frank's eyes following them, cold as a winter wind, full of the same desperate calculation she remembered from their last days together. The marriage license might be yellowed, but its power to harm was still fresh as new ink. That night, she held Sarah extra long before bed, played the piano until her fingers ached, and finally fell asleep in the parlor chair. She woke to find Weston's coat draped over her and the pocket watch on the table beside her, ticking away. The hours until judgment would come again. Sheriff Miller's badge caught the lamplight as he set it deliberately on Weston's desk, the silver star a quiet warning. Outside, the night pressed against the study windows, and somewhere in that darkness, Frank waited like a storm about to break. "He's been asking questions around town," the sheriff said, his weathered face grave, "about ranch schedules, delivery routes, and there's been strangers at the saloon, men with hard eyes who don't belong. Sarah's at the Martinez ranch." Weston said, his hand finding mirrors in the shadows. "Elena's keeping her there until this is settled." The sheriff nodded approval. "Smart! Frank's got 3 men with him from what I gather, men who owe him from poker games, desperate enough to do his bidding." 4 against 2, Mira said softly, but the sheriff shook his head. 4 against 4. Mrs. Martinez sent her. "Boys over. They're watching the north and east approaches." He touched his badge. "This star means something in Silver Creek. Means we don't let men like Frank Blackwood write their own laws." A horse nickered outside. One of the Martinez boys signaling all clear, but the night felt charged, like the air before lightning strikes. Mira's fingers traced the edges of the repaired pocket watch, its steady ticking a counterpoint to her. "Racing heart, he'll come for me," she said. "He won't be able to help himself. The fact that I'm happy that I've built something without him, it'll eat at him worse than any gambling loss. Let him come." Weston's voice was quiet, but carried the same iron certainty she'd heard the day he faced down a stampeding steer. "This ends tonight." As if his words had summoned it, a pebble struck the study window, then another. A signal, but from friend or foe. Sheriff Miller moved to the window, staying in shadows. "Martinez's youngest boy," he reported. 3 riders, approaching from the south. "The back orchard," Mira said suddenly. "Frank knows about the irrigation work. He'll guess we've cleared paths through the trees." Weston was already moving. "Through the orchard to the house. He'll want to make a show of it." "Like a poker game," Mira whispered. "Everything's always been a game to him." The sheriff's badge gleamed as he checked his gun. "Then let's make sure he loses this one." They moved through the house, dousing lamps, creating shadows that could hide friends or enemies. The pocket watch marked each minute with mechanical precision as they waited. Mira found herself at the piano, her fingers resting silently on the keys that had brought so much healing. The first shot shattered a parlor window. "Mira!" Frank's voice carried from the darkness. "Come on out, darling. Time to go home." She stood, but Weston caught her arm. "Wait." "No." She met his eyes. "I won't hide. Not anymore." The sheriff moved to flank the door, while Weston positioned himself by the broken window. Mira walked onto the porch, her steps measured, calm despite her pounding heart. Frank stood in. The yard, flanked by 3 shadows with rifles. The moonlight showed his face clearly, no longer wearing the mask of reformation, but twisted with the familiar spite she remembered. "There's my wife," he called, mock-jovial, "all dressed up like a rancher's lady. But we both know what you really are, don't we? Property, my property." "No, Frank." Her voice carried clearly in the night air. "I know exactly what I am. I'm the woman who made the orchard bloom, who helped a child find her voice, who fixed what was broken and built something new." She touched the pocket watch in her pocket. "I'm the woman who finally learned to tell time by her own clock, not yours." "Pretty speech." He raised his rifle. "Now get in the wagon." "That's not happening, Frank." Sheriff Miller stepped onto the porch, badge catching starlight. "Drop the rifle." One of Frank's men swung his weapon toward the sheriff, but suddenly the Martinez boys melted out of the shadows, their own rifles steady. The odds had shifted like a changing wind. "Last chance," Frank said, but his voice held a new note. Uncertainty. "The law says you're my wife." "The law says a lot of things." Judge Parker's voice rang out as he emerged from the darkness. "But tonight it says you're under arrest for assault, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping." Frank's finger tightened on the trigger. Time stretched like pulled taffy, and Mira saw everything with crystal clarity. Weston tensing to move, the sheriff's hand on his gun, the Martinez boys steady as rocks, and something else, Sarah, who must have slipped away from Elena, standing in the orchard behind Frank. Their eyes met, and Mira knew what her girl was about to do. The trees. Sarah shouted, and every irrigator they'd repaired over the summer roared to life, spraying water like summer rain. In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. Frank's men, startled, fired wild. The sheriff's badge flashed as he moved. Weston tackled Mira to safety, and Frank, trying to keep his footing in the sudden mud, fell face first into the dirt he'd once sold her to escape. When the water stopped, Frank and his men lay face down in the muck, covered by the Martinez boys' rifles, while Judge Parker recited their rights with evident satisfaction. The sheriff's badge gleamed with water droplets as he snapped handcuffs closed. "Good timing with the irrigation," he said to Sarah, who had run to Mira's arms. "Your aunt would be proud of that strategy." "Catherine always said," Sarah replied, watching Frank being led away, "that justice flows like water. You just have to know how to direct it." The new orchard deed sat before Judge Parker, the ink still drying on its pristine surface. Mira stared at her name written there, not as Frank's wife, not as Weston's business arrangement, but as herself. Mira Catherine Andrews, owner and proprietor of Heart Orchard South. Catherine would have loved this, Sarah whispered from beside her, the girl's fingers tracing the embossed seal. She always said the orchard needed a woman's touch. Judge Parker cleared his throat. "With Frank Blackwood's conviction and the divorce decree finalized, you're free to own property in your own right, Miss Andrews." He smiled, the expression softening his judicial gravity. "Though I suspect that title might be changing again soon, given the way Mr. Hart looks at you." Mira felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she studied the document that represented so much more than just land. Weston had insisted on this, splitting off the southern orchard with its newly blooming trees and deeding it in her name. "A woman should stand on her own ground," he'd said that morning as they walked among the trees. "Whatever comes next between us, this will always be yours." Now, watching the judge add his final signature, Mira remembered another piece of paper. That yellowed marriage license that had bound her to Frank. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One document had caged her. This one gave her wings. "There's one more thing," Judge Parker said, pulling out another paper. "Frank signed a full confession before they took him to the territorial prison. Says here he'd been running a scheme across 3 territories, using married women as collateral in rigged games. You weren't the first, but you'll be the last." Sarah's hand found Mira's, squeezing tight. They both knew what might have happened if Weston hadn't been the one to win that poker game, if he hadn't seen a woman instead of a possession. "The other women," Mira said carefully. "The ones before me, are they being notified?" The judge's expression hardened. "Frank's properties will be sold to make restitution. Some of them might even find their way home, like you did." Home. The word echoed in Mira's heart as they left the courthouse. Outside, Silver Creek bustled with spring activity. Mrs. Peterson waved from her shop, her previous judgment replaced by fierce approval since the night of Frank's arrest. The Martinez boys tipped their hats, proud of their role in bringing justice to bear. Weston waited by the wagon, his face lighting up the way it always did when he saw her now, like a man who couldn't quite believe his good fortune. But today, there was something else in his expression, a nervous energy she hadn't seen before. "Well?" he asked as they approached. Mira held up the deed. "It's done. I'm a landowner. You've been more than that since the day you made that pump work." He helped Sarah into the wagon, then turned to Mira with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I was thinking, the North Orchard needs just as much care as the South. Might be good to have someone who knows about irrigation systems and stubborn trees. Someone who understands that broken things can be beautiful when they're mended right." Sarah's grin was wide enough to split the sky. "Are you really this bad at proposing, Uncle Weston?" He laughed, running a hand through his hair. "Worse, probably. But I figure Mira's used to me being better with horses than words by now." Mira looked between them. the man who had offered sanctuary and found love, the girl who had become her daughter in every way that mattered. Then she looked at her deed, at the name that proclaimed her freedom to choose. "The orchards do better together," she said softly. "Like families." Weston's smile could have lit up the darkest night. "Is that a yes? That's a what took you so long?" She reached up to touch his cheek, feeling the future unfold before them like apple blossoms in spring. "But yes, always yes," Sarah whooped loud enough to startle the horses. From the courthouse steps, Judge Parker watched them with obvious satisfaction. All around them, Silver Creek went about its business. But the air felt different now, charged, with possibility instead of fear. The deed in Mira's pocket crackled as Weston helped her into the wagon. Her own land, her own name, her own choice. Behind them lay Frank's confession and all the chains of the past. Ahead stretched the orchards, north and south, separate but stronger together, like the grafted branches of the Duchess apple that had started it all. The photographer's black cloth rippled in the June breeze as he adjusted his camera. "Hold still now," he called from behind the apparatus. "This moment we're capturing. It's not just a picture, it's a piece of history." Mira sat in the garden chair, surrounded by blooming apple trees, with Sarah standing beside her and Weston's strong hand on her shoulder. The girl wore her best blue dress, her dark hair neatly braided with ribbons that matched the forget-me-nots Catherine had planted years ago. They'd chosen this spot carefully, under the Duchess apple, its branches heavy with fruit that had once been only a dream. "Chin up a bit, Miss Sarah," the photographer instructed, "and Mr. Hart, perhaps a small smile. This isn't a wanted poster after all." Sarah giggled, breaking her pose. "Uncle Weston always looks serious in pictures. Catherine used to say he thought smiling would crack his face." "Did she now?" Weston's voice held warm amusement. "And what would she say about you wiggling like a puppy when you're supposed to be still?" "She'd say I come by it honestly," Sarah replied promptly, "on account of you being the same way at my age. I read it in her letters." The photographer emerged from his cloth. "The light's perfect now if we can get everyone settled." Mira reached up to touch Weston's hand on her shoulder, feeling the simple gold band that matched her own. They'd been married 2 weeks ago, right here under the Duchess apple. Judge Parker had officiated, his judicial gravity softened by evident satisfaction. Sarah had stood as their witness, proudly reading the marriage certificate aloud before, signing her name in careful script. "Ready?" the photographer asked, ducking back under his cloth. Mira felt Weston squeeze her shoulder. Sarah's hand found hers, warm and sure. "Ready," they said together. The camera's flash powder ignited with a soft whoosh, capturing them in silver nitrate and sunshine. Sarah's brilliant smile, Weston's quiet joy, Mira's face full of peace that once seemed impossible. But more than their expressions, the photograph would capture something else. The subtle ways they leaned into each other, the unconscious unity of people who had chosen to be family. Wonderful. The photographer emerged, beaming. "Now, while the plate develops, perhaps the young lady would like to show me her reading progress. I hear there's to be a recitation at the church social tomorrow." Sarah straightened proudly. "I'm reading Paul Revere's Ride, all the way through, with proper dramatic pauses, just like Mira taught me. She's been practicing for weeks," Weston added, his voice rich with pride. "Even the horses know it by heart now." While Sarah led the photographer to the porch to demonstrate her delivery, Mira remained under the apple tree with Weston. His hand slid from her shoulder to her waist. Drawing her close, "Happy?" he asked softly. She looked around at their kingdom. The thriving orchard, the house now full of music and laughter, the future stretching before them like a road paved with possibility. "More than I knew was possible." Catherine would have loved this, he said, echoing Sarah's frequent observation. "She always said the house needed children's voices and a woman's touch. Said I was only half living, rattling around here alone." "You weren't alone," Mira reminded him. "You had Sarah. I had Sarah's body, but her spirit was as quiet as mine." He watched his niece gesturing dramatically on the porch, her voice carrying the famous lines about lanterns and midnight rides. "You woke us both up. You did the same for me." She turned in his arms to face him. When I came here, I was like that broken pump. All the pieces there, but nothing flowing freely. You gave me space to fix myself." From the ER porch came enthusiastic applause as Sarah finished her recitation. The photographer was effusive in his praise, asking her to spell some of the more challenging words to prove she wasn't just reciting from memory. "Listen to her," Weston said proudly. "Our girl's going to set the world on fire someday. Our girl." The words settled in Mira's heart like seeds finding fertile soil. Yesterday, the adoption papers had arrived from Judge Parker. Another document, transforming their chosen bonds into legal ones. Soon, Sarah would truly be their daughter in all ways, though in their hearts she already was. The photographer called them back for one more pose. This time, he arranged them by the piano on the porch, Sarah seated at the keys, Mira and Weston standing behind her. The instrument gleamed in the late afternoon light, its wood reflecting their faces like a mirror of past and future. "Perfect," the photographer said, disappearing under his cloth again. "A family portrait for the ages," as the flash powder ignited. Once more, Mira thought about all the portraits that would follow this one. Sarah growing tall and strong, the orchard bearing fruit year after year, their love deepening like tree roots seeking water. This photograph would mark their beginning, but their story would continue beyond any camera's ability to capture. The future, like their grafted apple trees, would bear fruit they couldn't yet imagine. But today, in this moment of silver nitrate and sunshine, they were simply and perfectly what they had chosen to be. A family, rooted in love's fertile soil, growing stronger with each passing season. The new wedding ring caught the morning light as Mira worked in the orchard. Its simple gold band, a constant reminder of chosen love. Unlike her first ring, sold for gambling debts, this one had been crafted with purpose, the inside engraved with apple blossoms and the words, "Love bears fruit." 1 year had passed since Frank's departure. The orchards, north and south, had yielded their first full harvest since Catherine's time. Sarah, now officially their daughter, had read the ceremony at the county fair's harvest festival. Her voice, clear and confident, as she announced the weights and varieties of their prize-winning apples. "Mama!" Sarah's call floated across the orchard. Even after 3 months, the word still made Mira's heart skip. "The preserves are ready for labeling." They had spent yesterday putting up jars of apple butter and preserves, working side by side, in the kitchen that now hummed with constant activity. Catherine's recipes, discovered in the old ledgers, had proven as reliable as her grafting techniques. "Coming, dear heart." Mira gathered her pruning tools, pausing to touch the Duchess apples. Trunk. The tree that had first bloomed for her now stood tall and strong, its branches reaching toward others that had once seemed beyond saving. Inside, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, carefully copying labels in her best handwriting. "Mrs. Martinez ordered 6 jars of apple butter," she reported, "and Judge Parker wants preserves for his sister in Boston. He's become quite the supporter of Hart Orchards," Mira observed, washing her hands at the pump that had started everything. "Hart Andrews Orchards," Sarah corrected with a grin. "That's what the new sign says anyway. Papa had it made special. Weston's." Boots sounded on the porch before he appeared in the doorway, his face lightened by the same joy that had marked it since their wedding day. "Speaking of signs," he said, "the photographer dropped this off in town." He produced a large envelope containing their family portrait. The colors had been hand-tinted, Sarah's blue dress, the pink apple blossoms, the warm wood of the piano. But what struck Mira most was their expressions, the visible love that no posed formality could hide. "We look like we belong together," Sarah said softly, touching the photograph's surface, "like we were always meant to be family." "We were," Weston replied, his hand finding Mira's, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. Just took us a while to find each other. The ring caught the light again, and Mira remembered the morning Weston had given it to her. They had walked in the orchard at dawn, checking the trees after a spring storm. He had stopped beneath the Duchess apple, taken her hand, and spoken words that still echoed in her heart. "This land knows who you are," he had said. "These trees have witnessed your strength, your gentleness, your capacity for nurturing life from what seemed dead. This ring isn't a chain like the last one. It's a circle, like the seasons, like the way love returns and grows stronger each year." Now, watching Sarah arrange preserves for delivery, seeing Weston's quiet contentment as he reviewed the harvest ledgers, Mira felt the truth of those words. Their love had grown like the orchards, carefully tended, deeply rooted, bearing fruit that would feed generations to come. The pocket watch Mira had repaired chimed noon from its place of honor on the mantel. Sarah looked up from her labeling. "Time for my piano practice?" "After you finish those labels," Mira smiled, "then perhaps we can all work on the Harvest Festival program." They had been asked to provide music this year, Sarah's playing, Mira's voice, and even Weston had agreed to join in for one number. The Martinez boys would accompany them on guitar and fiddle, making it a true community celebration. Later, as evening painted the orchard in gold, they sat on the porch together. Sarah practiced her music while Mira and Weston listened, their hands linked, wedding rings touching. The trees stretched away before them, strong and nurturing as the love that had brought them all together. "Catherine would have loved this," Sarah said, closing the piano as stars began to appear. "She does," Weston replied softly. "Every blooming tree, every piece of music, every moment of joy, she's part of it all." Mira touched her wedding ring, feeling its solid warmth. Unlike her first marriage, bound by a paper contract and a ring sold for greed, this union had been forged in choice and commitment, tested by fire and strengthened by love freely given and returned. The orchard stretched away into darkness, but she knew every tree, every path, every story written in branches and roots. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, new opportunities to choose each other. But tonight, surrounded by the family she had helped build, Mira was exactly where she belonged. The ring glowed softly in the gathering dark. It's engraved. Apple blossoms a promise, kept and renewed with each passing season. Love, like their grafted trees, had borne fruit sweeter than any they could have grown alone.